This is continuous coverage.
Continuous coverage. Continuous coverage.
In the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
Hidden Killers podcast.
We are now on segment number 3 on day number 2 of the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell here on the 11th of April 2023. Let's go back to the courtroom.
After those remains you've discussed were recovered, what was the next part of your investigation?
At that point, once we got Tylee out of the ground, we determined that we were going to take JJ and Tylee to the Ada County Coroner's office to get ready for an autopsy the next day. So at that point, they were picked up. JJ and Tylee were picked up from the morgue by the Fremont County Coroner Brenda Dye and Detective Kai Kamanu, who drove the coroner's vehicle, and myself and Lieutenant Ron Ball followed behind that vehicle all the way to Boise, where they were dropped off at the Ada County Coroner's office.
And I'm sorry, what date was that?
It was June 10th.
Okay. Did anything else happen on June 10th?
No.
Okay. Your Honor, can I have a quick sidebar?
Yes. All right, Mr. Wood, you can continue your inquiry.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd ask that the witness be handed what's been marked as State's Exhibit 10B through 10L. We'll need that. Detective, if you can review those and let me know when you're done.
Okay.
Do you recognize those documents?
I do.
What do they purport to be?
Photographs taken that day at the search warrant at Mr. Daybell's property.
What day was that?
June 9th, 2020.
Okay. And you were present that day?
That's correct.
All right. And do you recognize each of those individual photos?
Yes.
Are they true and accurate representations of what you witnessed that day?
They are.
And, Your Honor, the state would move for admission of State's Exhibit 10B through, I believe, through L.
Any objection?
May I have voir dire, Nate?
You may.
So, 10B, that is a photograph of, what is that? What is that?
That's the front of Mr. Daybell's residence.
Okay. And you didn't take that photograph?
I did not.
Okay. But you recognize the front of the residence?
That's correct.
10C, what is that?
That is a photograph of the fire pit.
You didn't take that photograph?
No, sir.
Was that taken on the day that you were there?
It was.
Okay. Did you see the photograph being taken?
I did not.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'm going to object on relevance. These don't go to foundation. He's already laid an adequate foundation.
Is there a objection you're considering that's based on foundation? Or what's the basis of this line of voir dire?
Well, I don't know when these were taken. I don't know who took them. And he's saying that all this happened and he saw all of it happen.
Okay, well, we'll just go through them individually then, take up an objection one by one. So what's the objection on 10B?
10B, no objection.
All right, 10B is admitted. Let's move on to 10C, which has been offered. Is there an objection?
No objection.
All right, 10C is admitted. 10D, is there an objection to that photograph?
No.
All right, 10D is admitted. 10E, is there an objection to that?
10E, yes, there's an objection.
What is the objection?
I don't know what this is. It's just a photograph of a piece of some grass.
All right, Mr. Wood, response?
Detective, do you have photographed 10E in front of you?
I do.
Okay. What does that purport to be?
That is what I earlier testified to with the long grass and the short grass and a little bit of dirt sticking out where JJ Vallow was eventually uncovered. That's the location.
And do you know where this location is?
Yes.
Can you point to it on the demonstrative exhibit 10A?
Right there.
Okay, and what are you pointing at?
It's just the east side, northeast side of the tree next to the pond area.
Okay, and the image depicted in 10E, you saw that with your own eyes?
That's correct.
Is that a true and accurate representation of what you witnessed that day?
Yes, it is.
State moves again for admission of 10E.
Any objection?
With that foundation, Your Honor, no objection.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. So 10E will be admitted. What's next to look at 10F? Is there an objection to that?
There is, Your Honor. I don't know what that is either.
All right, Mr. Wood, if you'd lay some extra foundation on that one, please.
Detective, do you have State's Exhibit 10F in front of you?
I do.
What does it purport to be?
That's the exact same location as 10E, except with the topsoil uncovered.
Okay. And is that a true and accurate representation of what you witnessed that day?
It is.
Thank you, Your Honor. Based on what he's just stated and the foundation he laid for the previous photograph, we'd move for the admission of, what number are we on?
10F.
10F.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. I may have my dear in need of an objection.
Briefly, Mr. Thomas, yes.
Thank you. So you indicated that you were working at the fire pit, which would have been 10C, when other people were working on the burial site of JJ. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
So I was working at the fire pit. Then we were called down to the area of the pond area because they had located that original spot from 10E. So when I got there, that's when I got there is 10E.
I see. Okay. And you remained there throughout the time when they found what was purported to be JJ's body?
That's correct.
Okay. I have no objection, Your Honor.
Okay.
To the remainder
All right, no
of the
objection then to the remainder.
exhibits.
All right, so, and correct me if I'm wrong then, Mr. Thomas, without objection, 10F will be admitted, 10G, 10H, 10I, 10J, 10K, and 10L are all admitted into evidence. Mr. Wood, you can continue your examination.
Thank you. Detective, can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 10B that morning?
That's the front of Mr. Daybell's residence. He was parked in a vehicle just in front of this vehicle backed in. So that's not the vehicle that Mr. Daybell was sitting in, but parked in front of that one backed in.
Okay. And is that the area where you went, where you observed him looking over his shoulder?
That's correct.
And you testified that you went to that same location to see where he was looking, correct?
Correct.
Can you use the pointer and show what you saw when you did that?
So when I was standing next to Mr. Daybell's vehicle, it was in this location here. Everybody see that pointer?
Your Honor, I wonder if we could dim the lights a little bit.
Yes.
I was standing in this location on the driver's side. He was backed in on the driver's side of Mr. Daybell's vehicle. And when I was looking this way, it was directly to this tree here, which is where JJ was located, just underneath this tree.
Thank you. Detective, what did you observe in State's Exhibit 10C?
That's the fire pit where I was originally tasked to work. In the fire pit, we also located burnt bone fragments and teeth.
What do you observe in State's Exhibit 10D?
That's standing at the west side of the property facing east. Oh, where is it? And this tree is the tree that JJ was buried underneath, just on the other side of this tree.
Your Honor, I'm concerned that the pointer isn't very visible.
We probably have another one. Is there a backup pointer we've got? Maybe.
And if not, would it be possible for the witness to stand at the picture and point?
If you'll give us just a moment, I think we can get one rounded up here. While we're waiting on a quick break here for that pointer, if anybody'd like to stand up, stretch their legs, that's certainly fine. You can do that. All right, thank you. Please be seated. Go ahead, Mr. Wood.
Can I inquire, did we get another pointer?
We did.
Can we just ask Okay, that's much better, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, Detective Hermosillo, I'm going to ask again, what did you observe in State's Exhibit 10D?
This is standing on the west side of the property facing east. The tree in the photograph is where JJ was buried underneath. And he was just buried right underneath, right there where that pointer is.
Okay.
Pointer is, I'm sorry.
Detective, can you just describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 10E?
That's the photograph that when we were originally working at the fire pit, we were called over. That's directly underneath the tree. And as I earlier testified, the difference in weed growth and the level of grass and a little bit of dirt showing brought our attention over there. So that's what we originally had seen.
Okay. Just due to the lighting, can you use the pointer to point out those things you were talking about, where the grass is longer, where it's shorter?
The grass is longer up here, and it's shorter through here.
Okay, thank you. What did you observe in State's Exhibit 10F?
This is a photograph of after we had removed the topsoil. You can see we started to, just the first little layer of topsoil, once it was removed, you could see the beginning of the white rocks starting to protrude through the top of the dirt there.
What did you observe in State's Exhibit 10G?
This is a photograph of once that topsoil was removed, the three white large rocks, the small rock. You can see right here is part of the wood paneling I described earlier underneath the rocks. We also noticed that the roots were cut along the burial site.
Okay, so just to clarify, the excavation team did not cut those roots?
That's correct. They were already cut.
Okay. What did you observe in State's Exhibit 10H?
This is a photograph once we remove the large white rocks, the wood paneling that was underneath them, thin wood paneling.
Okay. You had testified earlier about a smell.
Correct.
Were you able to notice that smell at this point in the excavation?
Absolutely. As soon as we removed the topsoil, we were able to smell.
Okay. What did you observe in State's Exhibit 10I?
This is a photograph of when the wood paneling was removed. As I testified earlier, the soil began to look different. It began to look moist. And we started to see that black plastic round object starting to show through the dirt.
Can you use the pointer to point out that?
So this is the moist soil that we started to see, and this is the black round plastic that started to come through.
Can you tell the jury what you observed in State's Exhibit 10J?
Once we started to slowly excavate more of the soil, we were able to uncover a little bit more of the round plastic. And this is where it looked like to be the crown of a head sticking through the dirt.
What did you observe in State's Exhibit 10K?
Once we saw the crown of the head sticking through the dirt, a small, sharp instrument was used to cut through the plastic, just enough to expose what was underneath. After we cut through the black plastic, there was another layer of white plastic underneath that. We cut through that, and that's when we were able to see what appeared to be brown human hair sticking out from the white plastic. So there's pieces of hair on top of the white plastic that that fell off of the head. Also, you can see part of the black plastic starting to take shape in the burial site.
And what do you observe in State's Exhibit 10L?
This is where we removed the dirt off of the plastic. It's in the shape of a small human body that looks to be in the black plastic. And at that point, this is where we removed JJ and placed him in a body bag and into the coroner's vehicle, just as is.
And what did you observe in State's Exhibit 10M?
After we removed JJ, there was still moist soil.
Counsel, I apologize. Which exhibit are we on now?
10M?
We stopped at L, I think.
Oh.
With what was previously moved and admitted. And I don't think I have a courtesy copy of M yet. Oh, I do. Apologies. So this has not yet been admitted.
Okay, Your Honor, if this could be handed back up to the witness, and I'll...
All right, the witness will be handed Exhibit States 10M.
Detective, do you recognize State's Exhibit 10M?
Yes.
Do you recognize that? What does that document purport to be?
The burial site where we took JJ out of.
Okay, and were you there the day that photograph was taken?
That's correct.
And did you observe that with your own eyes?
But yeah, I helped lift him out of the burial site.
Is that photograph a true and accurate representation of what you witnessed that day?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the State moves for admission of State's Exhibit 10M.
Any objection?
No.
All right, Exhibit 10M is admitted. And you can publish it, Mr. Wood.
Thank you. Detective, what do you observe in State's Exhibit 10M?
That's the moist soil that was underneath JJ once we removed him. That's just from the body breaking down, body decomposition. So we dug further than that moist soil just to make sure we got everything, and that's what that's a photograph of.
Okay. Did you find anything else buried there?
No.
Okay. Just one moment, Your Honor.
Counsel, let me have a brief sidebar, please. Okay, I just had a brief sidebar with counsel discussing our scheduling for today. Given the nature of the evidence we're about to go into and the time of the day, I'm going to suggest that we end up taking our lunch break at this time. We'll take a little longer lunch than typically we would, so we'll try to start back up here at 12:45, so a little over an hour, and we will be in recess until then. So please rise for adjournment.
Your Honor, before we start, they just brought Lori up. Can we have a minute to talk to her, either in the back hallway or downstairs?
You may. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll just continue the lunch recess a little bit. If you'd like to exit with your client, we'll do that, and then we'll go back on the record. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, we're back on the record on case CR 22-21-1624, State versus Lori Noreen Vallow. We broke for lunch and had a long lunch break. Legal issues arisen that the court did take up a sidebar with counsel off the record, have been advised of a situation that needs to be argued and determined outside of the presence of the jury at this time. So Mr. Archibald, Mr. Thomas, I'm aware that your client would have a request at this time. I need to consider that request and hear argument from the state. We'll make a determination and then proceed forward regardless of the determination with additional evidence today. So, would it be Mr. Thomas or Mr. Archibald making the motion at this time?
I will, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Archibald, if you'd like to make your motion at this time, you may.
Your Honor, my client wishes to waive her presence at the testimony for the remainder of the day. It was emotional this morning, and she indicated to us she did not want to attend this afternoon. There is a rule that contemplates a defendant waiving their presence. Would ask the court to review that rule and any relevant case law. We would remind the court of the history of this case with my client, her fragile state of mind, the mental health concerns, the myriad reports that have been filed about her mental health to justify such a request.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. Who's going to respond on behalf of the state?
Thank you, Your Honor. I will be responding for the state.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, Idaho Rule 43 favors a defendant being present for the duration of trial. While there are some exceptions outlined, in doing some quick research, case law indicates that there is no absolute right for a defendant not to be present. They do, however, have an absolute right to be present at trial. In addition, case law is clear, as well as Idaho Rule 43, that a court can require the defendants present. Similarly, to the extent that a court can order a disruptive defendant to be bound and gagged and remain in court, it is clear this is how important it is to have a defendant present for the proceedings. Further, the state of Idaho also has a right to have the defendant present for the duration of trial. This isn't the first time that this court has dealt with the defendant's refusal to participate in the proceedings or come out for proceedings. We respect that it is the court and not the defendant that controls the proceedings and how they move forward. If this court is to consider the request of the defense counsel for the defendant not to be present, the state would request that this court conduct an inquiry with the defendant on the record. I think case law is clear that that is a requirement in order for a finding that the defendant does not need to be present. But I would again indicate case law is very clear, as well as Rule 43, that this court could override the defendant's request not to be present and require her presence in the courtroom. Further, if the court is to have the inquiry and determine that the defendant is going to be allowed to refuse to participate in certain portions of the proceedings, the state would request a jury instruction reflecting such, that it was due to no fault of the state, but that the defendant chose not to be present for certain portions or certain evidence being presented. We would further request that we receive a ruling today that the state will absolutely be able to comment during closing arguments on the defendant's refusal to be present during the showing of certain evidence. And we would ask that that ruling go into effect for any further portions of the trial outside of just today. If the court were to allow the defendant not to be present and we run into this issue again, that would be an ongoing request from the state. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, having heard the state's argument, is there any rebuttal argument?
I think jury instructions at this point would be premature. So typically there's a jury instruction conference at the end of the case. So I'd ask the court to reserve ruling on that matter.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Archibald. All right. Well, this issue came up over the lunch hour. I've spent some time with my staff attorney also researching the issue. I've heard argument from counsel, and I appreciate you taking the time to quickly research that issue. I am prepared to make a ruling. So Idaho Criminal Rule 43 is the rule that deals with the presence of the defendant. In addition, a defendant has the right to be present at their trial as secured by both the United States Constitution and the Idaho Constitutions. And there is some authority out there about a voluntary or involuntary absence after trial started. So walking through the rule, presence is required under 43A subsection 3 at every stage of the trial, including the impaneling of the jury and the return of the verdict. And then there's a set of presence not required list under 43B, which don't apply here. And then Part C is waiving continued presence. So the rule does have some contemplation about presence being waived. And that states, in general, a defendant who was initially present at trial or other proceedings waives the right to be present under the following circumstances. The first circumstance, Part A, when the defendant is voluntarily absent after the trial has begun, regardless of whether the court informed the defendant of an obligation to remain during trial. The rule goes on to talk about the waiver's effect under Part C2. If the defendant waives the right to be present, the proceeding may continue to completion, including the verdict's return and sentencing during the defendant's absence. There's one case in Idaho, fairly recent, from 2021, called State versus Crop, 168 Idaho 948, and that goes through an analysis of the defendant's presence. It states that the right to be present at trial is secured by both the United States Constitution and the Idaho Constitution. Like other constitutional rights, the right to be present can be waived. A defendant, after having been present at the trial's inception, can waive this constitutional right through a later voluntary absence. And then it talks about a 3-step process to determine whether an absence is voluntary or not. Most of the cases on this issue deal with people who were there for part of their trial and then just failed to show up maybe for the second, third day of trial or something, and what kind of finding would constitute that to be a voluntary absence if the state continues to proceed forward with the case in the absence of the defendant. There's not really any controlling law I've seen in Idaho on what the authority of the court is to override a request for a defendant to be voluntarily absent. But interestingly, as has been mentioned and argued by the state, the rule under waiving continued presence under Rule 43C1B talks about the authority a court would have to have a disruptive defendant continue to be present during trial, even if ordered by a court to, quote, bind and gag the defendant. So I think the rule contemplates that absences may occur. I think that provision of the rule also clearly indicates that the court does have the authority to order the appearance of the defendant in facing trial and proceedings, and the right of the parties to have the defendant present, including the defendant's own constitutional rights. And having considered the authority and not finding any cited case law to the contrary, I do think this court has the authority to override that request of the defendant to voluntarily excuse herself from certain portions of the trial and not others, where she's been here for the first day and a half of trial. And I do find that within the court's authority to conduct this trial, her presence can and should be required in order to ensure her due process rights and also to ensure a fair trial on behalf of the state. So with that having been considered, I have carefully considered the request of the defendant in this case, who is here present, and I am denying her request to excuse herself from this section of the proceedings that are occurring in the evidence presented by the state's case in chief. So that will be the court's ruling on that. I'll prepare a order to that effect, which will be entered into this case, and we will move forward with additional evidence to be presented in the defendant's presence. Mr. Archibald, any questions on that ruling?
No, Your Honor.
Does the state have any questions on the ruling?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, counsel. At this time, then, we'll have the jury brought back in for additional evidence.
All rise, please. Jury's not present, counsel.
All right. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we did take an inordinately long lunch break. I apologize, as you may have recalled from one of the many instructions you received when this case began. At times, there are delays where we are working behind the scenes on legal issues, and that's what was occurring outside of your presence. So I wanted to give you an explanation there. We're still committed to our trial schedule for the day of when I advised you we'd be ending each day roughly. So with that in mind, we do have continued testimony from the witness who has previously been placed under oath, Detective Hermosillo, and Mr. Wood, you can continue with your direct examination at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Hermosillo, you testified earlier about meeting Chad Daybell and Alex Cox, correct?
That's correct.
And you testified that you found Mr. Daybell's answer to one of your questions suspicious because you knew he was married to Lori Daybell, correct?
Correct.
Through your investigation, do you know when they were married?
November 5th, 2019.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be handed what's marked as State's Exhibit 30, and it will be offered as a demonstrative exhibit. Detective, so far throughout this trial, there have been many names and individuals listed. Did you put together a chart with associated pictures and names to aid the jury in understanding your testimony?
I did.
And did you do that to also help the jury keep track of the numerous individuals in this case?
Yes.
Can you look at State's Exhibit 30? What does that purport to be?
The exhibit I created with the various names and pictures.
Okay. And are those names matched to the pictures
Yes.
of the individuals who they purport to be?
Yes.
Your Honor, for demonstrative purposes and to aid the jury, I'd ask that State's Exhibit 30 be entered into evidence.
Any objection?
I've not received Exhibit 30. I have 31 and 31A and 31B. For demonstrative purposes, we have no objection to 30.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Exhibit 30 can be admitted for demonstrative purposes.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I publish that to the jury?
Yes, you may.
Detective, who do you observe on State's Exhibit 30?
Lori Vallow Daybell.
Actually, I'm going to stop you. Can you use the pointer and point to who you're talking about?
Lori Vallow Daybell. Charles Vallow. Alex Cox. Chad Daybell. Tammy Daybell. Tylee Ryan. Joshua JJ Vallow. And Melanie Pulowski, also known as Melanie Boudreaux.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd also ask that the witness be handed State's Exhibits 31A and 31B. These will also be offered for demonstrative purposes. Detective, do you recognize State's Exhibits 31A and 31B?
I do.
Okay. There have been many dates and events discussed thus far. Did you put together a chart of times and events to aid the jury in understanding your testimony and tracking the dates and times discussed?
Yes, I did.
Is that what State's Exhibits 31A and 31B are?
Yes, it is.
Are the dates and times and the individuals listed there true and accurate representations of what have been testified to so far?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would, for demonstrative purposes, ask for the admission of States Exhibits 31A and 31B.
All right. Let's start with 31A. Is there any objection to the admission of that as a demonstrative exhibit?
No.
31A will be admitted, and as to 31B, any objection?
No.
31B is also admitted as a demonstrative exhibit.
May I publish those to the jury, Your Honor?
You may.
Detective, similarly, can you use your pointer and point out what you observe on States Exhibit 31A?
July 11th, 2019 is the day that Charles Vallow dies. September 2nd or 3rd, Lori, Alex, Tylee, and JJ moved to Rexburg, Idaho. Last known proof of life for Tylee Ryan was September 8th, 2019. Last known proof of life for JJ Vallow was September 22nd, 2019. October 2nd, 2019 was the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. October 9th, 2019 was the attempted shooting of Tammy Daybell. October 19th, 2019 is the day that Tammy dies.
Similarly, Detective, can you point out what you observe on States Exhibit 31B?
31B is the key dates in the investigation we had spoken about earlier. November 1st, 2019 is the day I was contacted by Fremont County. November 4th, 2019 is the day that I seized the 2018 Jeep Wrangler. November 5th, 2019 is the date that Chad and Lori were married in Kauai. November 25th, 2019 is the day that I was requested to do a welfare check on JJ Vallow. November 26th, 2019 is the date that I contacted Alex Cox and Chad Daybell outside of that residence. November 27th, 2019 was the date we executed the search warrant at Lori Vallow's residence. June 9th, 2020 was the day we executed the search warrant at Chad Daybell's residence. And June 10th is the day we went to the Ada County Coroner's office.
Thank you.
This is continuous coverage
Continuous coverage. Continuous coverage.
in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
Hidden Killers Podcast.
That it is. There is more to come. Segment number 4 is next. Press subscribe so you don't miss any of it. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.